making some kind of deal with them.
I don't know what you're talking about.
How can you know what they're gonna ask you in return?
Sarah, whatever you have in your mind, nothing is wrong.
You just haven't seen the bill yet.
Hello, listening people.
Hello.
Hello, Bartek.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, Ryan. How are you?
Could you go softer?
Pretty well, Ryan. How are you?
Softer so the compression can't hear you. He said, I'm doing well, everyone. Thank you for tuning in.
I said pretty well, and then I said your name, Ryan.
Well, I don't speak Polish.
And then how are you? Oh, that's Polish, that joke.
Do you have any Polish facts for us this time, Bartek? It is the last bit of spooky month. Any spooky facts? And are they Polish? Every fact from Poland is spooky to me.
I think I was looking up a cast member from the film that we're covering today. I think they had like one Polish relative.
Okay. They mentioned Poland in the movie, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, there was a reference to the country.
To the country, to specific camps.
Yeah.
Because we talked about a fun movie. We talked about a very fun movie for the whole family, especially if you're someone who has had relatives that lived through the Holocaust and war. This is a knee slapper of a time. You must be cheering. You must be tears rolling down the face.
My poor great-grandfather, he didn't live to see this film.
He could have seen, the original film, Just think about that.
Also, you said past tense, like we've talked about a film, but
we watched a film. We're going to talk about this film now. No, we actually talked about it before we recorded. We did a whole episode, and then, I'm joking, of course, but...
We did talk for a long time after clicking record.
We are here to discuss a film that came recommended, and I recommended the movie. It fell on me. We have a cycle of recommendation. It goes Bartek week 1, week 2 it is me, and then the third week it is you, the listening people. That's right, you, the listening people, can recommend movies to us. We add them to the list, and we get around and discuss them. We would love more suggestions from you, the listening people. If you want to suggest them, you can just hit the links in the description of this episode and reach out to us via them, email or social media-wise.
That's true. And Ryan, when you picked the film, was there any other, qualifying condition for what type of film you would pick?
Well, you have conditions, I have conditions, but we have to be confined for October because it is the time in which we watch the creepy things, the crawly things, the gooey things.
The gooey month.
The gooey month. Oh, this is such a spooky month. It is. It's spoopy. It's spooky month in which we talk about movies that fit that October feel, whether they be direct horror or they're adjacent to that genre or just have that certain aesthetic vibe texture to it. And I recommended the 2018 remake, reimagining, re-envisioning of Suspiria. Suspiria is a classic Dario Argento film from the 70s, and then, as is the nature of the beast, things get redone, and whether that's good or bad, it's up to you to decide. And with 2018 Suspiria, arms were held up in absolute, fury at the idea that this is being remade. Even the original filmmaker was like, what's the point of remakes? Because it's either shot for shot, redo it, what's the point? Or you're changing so much of it, why call it Suspiria in the first place?
Yeah, I read that quote.
That's right. He had a lot of feelings. About this movie.
That's good, because feelings are human.
But, yes, the original film has a very similar story, but the way it's executed, not just visually, but also in the narrative, drastically different to what this new version is all about. And why cover this new version? Why did I do that, Bartek? Do you know why?
No, I wanted to ask you that question too.
Well, I saw the original for the first time this year in the cinema, and I was wanting to come back around and see what the new film was like, similar to what you did last episode, that was the follow-up to Rocky Horror, Shock Treatment. You hadn't seen Shock Treatment, but you had seen Rocky Horror, so I want to watch The Thing, and this is a good excuse to watch The Thing.
So this
Not the film The Thing, which also is a remake and had a remake.
Yeah. So at the beginning of this year, had you seen neither version of Suspiria?
Neither version
Okay.
of Suspiria. I have not delved into the Italian film scene, the giallo genre of things. Dario Argento as a filmmaker is one that I haven't really perused the work of, and it was on at the cinema with a double feature of The Love Witch, which is a film that we both have a particular fondness for, and I thought it would be a marvelous way of seeing the film for the first time.
So it was a witchy double feature?
It was a witchy double feature. They did Love Witch first and then Suspiria, which I found a bit peculiar. I would have done it the other way around, but that's just me.
That was your Barbenheimer.
That was my Barbenheimer.
Which one do you watch first?
That's exactly right. I would have gone the other way around. But I wanted to come back to this original, from the original to the remake. I thought it'd be fascinating to talk about on the podcast. I said in the ending of our last discussion, it is up to the listening people and yourself, Bartek, if you wanted to check out the original film as well. I said, for the sake of our conversation and for the podcast, this one's a priority and the other one have a look at afterwards, or whichever way round you do. But that's been my relationship with the Suspiria films in general. This is the year in which I finally said, I'm sitting down, I'm watching these. And not only is there that connective tissue, but both directors I've never seen a film from, and both directors have a pretty great catalogue of work. The director of this one, Luca Guadagnino, did Call Me By Your Name. This year he did Challenges. He did another one that I'm forgetting the name of off the top of my head that has Dakota Johnson and Tilda Swinton and Ralph Fiennes.
There was a bunch of trivia about I wanted to get a bunch of returning actors into this film, but I only got 2.
And I've never seen any of his films, but they've always been on my, I should check that out. Call Me By Your Name seems like seems like it could be a good movie.
I've heard great things about it. Yeah.
I like the look of it. I wanted to check out Challenges this year. That's the Zendaya film about tennis, and I just haven't gotten around to it. So, like with Dario Argento, Luca, he's a filmmaker that I'm deeply aware of. I know what they're about, but I've never actually done any of their films, so why not do this?
Does he focus on any particular genres or things like that?
No, I think one of the recurring things from what I understand is sexuality recurs in a bunch of his movies. He has a new one out this year called Queer. I think that tells you what you need to know, but I think he's interested in that, and sometimes genre pieces, but done in a very specific way. So you have this one, and then he had one called, I'm forgetting the name of it. I want to say it was called Bones and All or something, which was a cannibalistic love story. So that's interesting. I haven't watched that one. I know our friends over at the Contrarians podcast covered that movie and had quite a lot of feelings about it. But that's been my history, and that's a part of why I recommended this particular version of it on the podcast. Now, Bartek, how about yourself? Are you that aware or familiar with Suspiria, whether it be the original or this new one?
No, I've gone in pretty blind. I've basically only heard the name Suspiria somewhere. I don't even remember where. Probably, some film reviewer who likes giallo films may have mentioned it at some
Cinema
point.
Snob, probably.
Cinema Snob, maybe Jay from Red Letter Media. I don't know, but yeah, I knew the title, but I didn't know anything about it. Didn't know it was an Italian film, the original. Didn't know when it came out. I just knew that there is a film out there called Suspiria. So when you said Suspiria remake, I didn't even know that there were a remake and an original.
Yes. Well, you also knew before watching Jessica Harper was involved in both films. I referenced that at the end of our discussion. I made sure to say she was the lead in the original, and she has a small appearance in this version. So this has been not only Spooky Month, but Jessica Harper Month. It's been
60% Jessica Harper Month.
Yeah, it has.
It's just Gozu and the Menu didn't have her.
That we were aware of. Maybe she popped up secretly.
She was the American wife in Gozu.
Imagine if she was. That would have been a great pull, actually.
I forgot a lot of the details you mentioned at the end of last week's episode, where you'd mentioned, Jessica Harper's in it, and you mentioned Dakota Johnson was in it. Forgot a lot of that. after I finished watching the film and I read like, oh, Jessica Harper, this, I'm like, wait, what?
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, oh yeah, Ryan did mention that. And she played this character. And I Googled the character. I'm like, oh my God, how did I not notice?
She has the same hairstyle as we saw her last.
Yeah.
Like, incredible.
So crazy. Yeah. It's decades later. I'm like, oh my God, she's still recognizable.
It's just she wasn't speaking English in this movie, so
That's
maybe
true,
is a
that's
different
true.
thing. Where you're also maybe familiar with her because of her deep husky voice, and that's removed in this because she's speaking German. So everyone, we're going to now start discussing the film. If you have not seen it for yourself, we recommend that you do. Before we start diving into the spoilers, Bartek, how would you succinctly sum this up to someone? You're walking up to someone and you're wanting to let them know what Suspiria is about without giving away the big stuff. How would you do that?
Might be a bit tricky, but basically, it's set in 1977 in a dancing school in Germany, women's dancing academy in Germany. Our main character, an American girl, has applied and very quickly gotten in there, and she forms a relationship with some of the other girls there, and a sort of partnership with some of the leading women of the academy, who are very quickly shown, not directly to her, but to us, that they may be witches, and that there's a lot of rituals going on both inside and outside of like the dancing studio. And there's like a B plot intrigue of a psychoanalyst who's investigating one of the girls who left this academy and is slowly discovering that these weird occultish events are ongoing,
that they may be real, because he dismisses it as delusions of someone unwell, and that's where things go. It's two things really. It's the supernatural shenanigans going on within the school and the procedural happening outside of the school.
Yeah.
And that is a fascinating place to leap off from. For someone who has seen the original, I will say that this is a very similar story structure, except for the psychoanalyst part of it. That's kind of expanding upon a character that does somewhat exist in the original film, but they mainly exist in like two scenes to give the explanation of witches do exist. Here's the difference. So there's lots of differences, but the basic story structure is very much there, where our main girl has arrived in Germany from America. She wants to be a dancer. She's a fish out of water, a person in a foreign land. She comes into this academy after a previous girl has mysteriously disappeared under very suspicious circumstances, but she's going to try and ignore these obvious red flags because she is ambitious and wants to be the best of the best. And as stuff goes along, there's more and more and more and more horrors going on inside the academy. The big thing that is the inverse is we don't know it's witches until near the end properly. Well, in this film, they tell you witches right from the drop, and we are focusing on the teachers, aka the witches, in this movie. While in the other one, they are from the point of view of the lead character. So we are getting isolated sequences entirely in the way we are in this film, where none of the teachers, these witches, would you call sympathetic or main characters in the way that Madame Blanc is in this version. So and there's a lot of expanding upon certain things. For instance, in the original film, it just happens to take place in Germany just cause. Doesn't really matter. It could be anywhere. It could be Italy. It could be, as long as it's somewhere that isn't where the main character is from.
Yep.
This film, it really matters that it takes place in Germany.
There's a lot of references to like post-war tragedies, war tragedies, things like that.
And the academy itself is right across from the wall. It's looking right at the wall. When you have shots from inside the academy looking outside, all you see is the wall blocking outside. That's all you get. So it's like this constant reminder of the history and the oppression and the political strife and tensions going on without having it always be the TV in the background is telling you about this hostage situation that happened in real life and all of that. You are constantly reminded of like what was happening in Germany during the 70s. So that is what I wanted to say about that stuff. So you and I are both new to this. I have a bit of the baggage of being aware of the previous film, so I got to delight in seeing how it tweaked a bunch of stuff and made characters a bit different. But
it was interesting looking it up after the fact because, yeah, you'd made a point at last episode about like, ooh, you know, maybe check out the original. You know, you're pointing out the fact that this is a remake and you're casting a lot of attention to it. And I was looking up online like, oh, what do, you know, people think about that? And there's a lot of references in terms of like the reviews of this film to like, oh, you know, how does it compare to the original? The original this one did this. And I specifically Googled like, oh, do people highly recommend like watching the original first? And the consensus just seemed to be like they're so, you know, they're so different that it almost doesn't really matter. You can just watch them in any order. You can just watch one, you can watch the other. Yeah, there's not really that much of a thread in terms of like you have to watch one before the other.
Again, the similarities are just basically the overall beats of what I went through of the story, but stylistically, thematically, metaphorically, they're vastly different.
There's a lot of reference to like the coloring in both films are very different.
With the original Suspiria, it's this candy-coated horror nightmare that is very much the Dario Argento feel. If you aren't even familiar with that director, you are familiar with his style. If you look up even a still image of what he is all about, he's the one that has like the bright greens, the bright reds, the bright yellow lighting on a character holding a knife and the black glove killer. Like that's something we've seen be referenced in many, many things over the years. So while this film has its own stylistic choices, the snap zooms, the weird kind of slow motion blurry effects, the quick editing and then slow editing, it's the frame rate stuff it's played around with. That was something I was shocked by, was that this film visually is a lot more muted and drab and quote-unquote realistic. But there's a lot of filmmaking techniques in the camera and post that are very stylistic, that is still very much saying like, hey, this is a weird genre piece movie. We're not going to water this down, but we're not going to try and replicate the extremes of what the previous film did because that's what the previous film did. So it's got its own weirdnesses.
It feels very cold to look at. I've been to Poland in the winter and there were so many outdoor shots in this film where it was like, oh, yeah, I've been out there in this kind of weather. I think there was one where the psychoanalyst was like eating lunch against a tree outside. I'm like, yep, that looks like Poland winter to me. Not so much the wanting to eat under the tree, but like just where he was.
Well, you're not a native to Poland.
No, that's true.
If you lived there, you probably would do that. So
I have to ask my sister, oh, how is your sandwich under the tree in the cold?
Yeah, it's always cold. But what did you think of Suspiria overall? We've talked about like the previous work and relationships with and even looking stuff up, but as its thing, how did you go, especially since you were very blind to what you were going into?
Yeah, mixed feelings. It kind of reminded me of, not when we did it on our show, but when we did the Neon Demon with the Contrarians, where for a lot of it, I kind of was with the film, but then I sort of distanced myself as it went along, because this is a very long film. It's 150 minutes. I was with it for a lot of the first half because, you know, you are slowly learning everything, but at some point, I guess I just got a little bit tired, and it felt like the film just kept going on and on. But there were a lot of individual things, even after that point, where I really liked what they were doing. There were some really nice shots. The editing was really good. Yeah, a lot of...
It's pretty brutal, too. The film, when it does get to the brutality, it doesn't just shy away. It stays on it.
Yeah, especially like in the climax, there was a part where Tilda Swinton is like struck by some like invisible force and like she has a blood explosion at her head. I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I've seen this in like animated works and video games. I don't think I've ever seen this in like live action, and it looked really, really good.
It looked great. I understand what you're saying, and I had a smile on my face because as soon as you said Neon Demon, I was like, yeah, okay. There's a similarity here of what you're saying because
With a bit of Black Coat's daughter seasoning.
Oh yeah. I was actually thinking of Black Coat's daughter. That's a good pull. Yeah, I totally buy that. I was thinking of Starry Eyes a lot.
Yeah, especially
as
the audition
well.
scenes, yeah.
What I think is, and I don't want to impose this upon you, but I just think about this when you mentioned losing the thread of this and losing that, getting patience with it, is both Neon Demon and this have a doe-eyed main character in this case. Doe-eyed main character who's like, oh, I just want ambition and success. And then after a certain point, they become inhuman and uncaring or care. Actually, Dakota Johnson actually becomes supremely caring at the end of this, but there comes a point in both movies where the character has their transition from who they were when we started to the new entity of what they are by the end. And I wonder if that's like another contributing factor to what holds you back. I think the difference is, and this is a huge thing for me, I loved the Doctor. I loved our old man, who's also played by Tilda Swinton, everyone. But Tilda Swinton has multiple roles in this movie. But I thought they were the heart of the film. I thought that they were the connective tissue. They were the lead character for me. They were the one that I could rely on. They were the one that was the emotional core to this, while the stuff happening in the dance academy was good. It was creepy. You had the mystery. You had the suspense of we know the stuff the characters in there don't know. So you had that stuff. But I wasn't 100% in love with this movie. I respect it. I like it. I'm very excited to watch it again. This is the type of artistic endeavor I wish more filmmakers would do when given the task of you have to take a pre-existing thing and do something with it, because it has the utmost respect for what came beforehand, but it's doing its own thing. It's a clear vision. As soon as you start this movie, from the font to the framing to how the characters look to the actors that they choose, to even bringing Jessica Harper back and bringing her back in a way that, really makes me emotional, not just because of the in-context story that she's a part of, but because of the meta aspect of this was the lead of the previous movie. And she's now this haunted ghost that's in this one, this haunted ghostly figure in this one that you don't even know if they're real or not for a portion of time. I just commend the movie. I think that's the thing that I came away with this more than loving it as its own thing, was I was in a way invigorated by, the industry doesn't always have to make soulless cash grab attempts at restarting something that already existed. I'm sure for diehard Suspiria fans, they probably feel that way about this movie, but I just have to clap and just go, they came in here and they did what I wish I could do if I was in this position, which is like, if you asked me, like, what's a movie you would remake, I probably wouldn't choose Suspiria, but I would choose something that's like a little bit rough around the edges and like, we could do something here. And I think that's what they did.
Yeah, that's the common like catch-22 sentiment of like, you want to remake something to actually make it better or do it right, but the things that do get remade are the things that will pull in money.
Yeah, exactly. And horror often is the cheapest one for that. It's like, let's just do a remake of Texas Chainsaw. Why? The original Texas Chainsaw, the scrappiness of that movie is what makes that movie. It's the stickiness, it's the griminess, it's the fact that it feels like this is unearthed footage for that one. Why try and remake that? And people would say the same for this particular film, but removing all that baggage, I thought the film was pretty decent, but I just was lacking something here. Something was just, and I didn't feel the pacing as much. I thought it flowed relatively well, but I guess there's weirdly enough, I just wish maybe we got more inside of the witches' culture and like their internal politics. Maybe on a rewatch that would stand out more to me because it's way more present in this version. But I think I was more drawn to their stuff than any of the stuff with Dakota Johnson and her interacting
Well,
with the school.
there's so many scenes with them, yeah. And unfortunately, one of the like casualties of me, you know, kind of getting a bit impatient with the film was that a lot of the lore stuff with the witches kind of went over my head or out the other ear for a bit of it. But there are just so many scenes with them that it feels like I should have, you know, gathered a bit more about them. But then again, I've read some reviews and comments that were like, oh, the lore was explained really well. So it just feels like, did I miss something? Or
I just found them more deep, exciting characters than any of the girls dancing. And that is, you know, one of the casualties of the movie. And it's one of the decisions where Dakota Johnson, you know, Susie, she is a very blank person by design. She has this hint of an interesting backstory where she came from. What was Amish? She was Amish, right?
I can't even remember.
She was talking about the differences between Amish and Mennonite and how she had to leave, and then Tilda Swinton's like, oh, so you left a religion behind? And she has this cheeky little, not quite. There is something to be said about Dakota Johnson's performance. I think she does a great job, especially when you think back about what the reveal is of her character in the end. There's so many little tells of, oh, that was a strange thing she did as an actor. And then you think back, oh no, it's the character. Like, I'm thinking of the scene where she walks in on the witches making fun of the entranced policeman,
police officers, yeah.
And she leaves that, and instead of being fucking terrified or weirded out, she smiles and chuckles to herself about it. And I'm like, that's a weird reaction to have to that.
I didn't remember the smiling and chuckling, but I do remember it was a very underreacted thing.
Underreacted, but then when she comes back in the room, she smiles and chuckles, and it's like, that's a weird way of processing that. And when you know what this character actually is, that's 100% correct interpretation of how they would react to everything going on.
Yeah, the reveal is that she's the like one of the top 3 witches, right?
Yeah, she is one of the 3 witches, the one that Mother Marcos is pretending she actually is. She's like, I'm a child. I'm actually, you know, I'm the one. I'm the important. Blah blah blah.
As much as I was kind of tuned out by the end, like that twist, like when I thought about it, I was like, oh. If I do rewatch this film, that would be an interesting aspect to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because one of the scenes that really stuck out to me was there's that scene where they're dancing and she's jumping and the Tilda Swinton's like, oh, you're not jumping right. You're doing it wrong. And she has this whole, you know, speech where she's like, you know, we have to be one with the earth. And, you know, at that point in the film, that read as like, oh, you know, the young student is, you know, saying silly things and the older teacher is the wise one who's trying to correct them. But on a rewatch, I'm imagining that, you know, that scene would ring quite differently knowing the reveal.
Yes, and that they underestimate her, even though they want to use her, but she's in fact going to be using them.
It'd be like
and testing their loyalties, because that's the thing about it is she, by the end of it, dispatches with the disloyal witches in the coven and keeps the ones that were on the right side of things, which is Madame Blanc's way of looking at things, of her saying, this isn't right, we are going through this in a very self-serving, egotistical way, we aren't abiding by the culture of our coven and of witchdom and all of that. And so you have Susie coming in and she's looking at this and being like, well, I'm figuring, but there's the thing too of like, how much of it is she's aware she's Suspiria and then Suspiriorum, and then how much of it is she transforms into that because of all of the ritualistic awakening they're giving her. Because my favorite parts of the movie is the use of the Dance Academy as this nexus for black magic. The standout scene, I think we all know what it is.
The Olga scene?
It's the Olga scene.
Yeah.
It's excessive. It's grotesque. It's amazing, though. It's truly amazing.
Got A+ editing.
The sound. The sound design, the visual effects that they used for the little visual effects, like right even before it starts off, Tilda Swinton is rubbing the palms and the feet of Susie, and you see these little, like, just very, very subtle, but these little weird kind of beams of light left there in her hands and feet to indicate that Tilda Swinton is passing on some sort of spell or magic to make this dance now transmit onto what we will be intercutting with. Oh my god. Do you want to talk about that scene a bit more, expand upon that, and like what was your feelings towards it? Because that's the moment of violence that we get in the movie. Like that's when it really starts, because Patricia disappears. That's the thing. Like, she disappears. We don't know what happened to her, but Olga, she's the next one that's like, oh, they disappear. Well, we get to see why they disappeared first.
Yeah, it even starts in an interesting way. Like, she's storming out of the dance academy and she goes through a door that takes her into this, like, completely mirrored dance studio room. And already there, it's like, oh my god, this looks exactly like a dance studio room, but, like, the doors disappeared behind her and she's stuck in this room and it feels very threatening. And then up in the main dance studio where our main character is having her first class and she's going to do this, big deal dance. The dance has a lot of moves that can be seen as, I guess, violent. Like, there's a lot of, like, hands suddenly jabbing out in a direction that could be like a punch or a chop. And what this dance does is either physically hitting Olga in this room or doing like some sort of voodoo on her where she's like getting contorted and beaten up at the same time. Pulled apart, slammed against, or like she's intact the whole way through, and that makes it even more painful. And, the editing is done really well to, like, you see our main character do the move and then it will cut to that character getting hit by the move or being jammed in this direction.
And it all feels like a weird rhythmic dance piece, but it's also a horror movie set piece. It's a gore piece as well.
Like you said, the sound there's like a lot of these crunchy sounds when she hits the wall or like when her body contorts in a weird way. And eventually you get the final product where she's just lying on the ground and she's just like a rag doll or
a pretzel.
A pretzel, a lot of people call it, and or a wooden doll that's just been completely damaged and destroyed. And yeah, it's a really memorable moment in the film.
And our main character is unaware that that's what's happening via her dancing. And that will be a recurring thing throughout the movie is we are aware so much of the information that the main characters are not aware of.
Yeah, there's a lot of dramatic irony.
The dramatic irony and the suspense from it as well, because when's it going to break? When's push going to come to shove? And how will our characters react? Because after a certain while, you start to think, even if Susie finds out, she may not care. Like, that's a thing too. Like, she becomes this much more closed off, selfish person as the film goes on. So even before the end reveal of who she actually is and what she actually represents, if she found out like this is stuff that's happening because of her dancing, would she stop wanting to dance? And the answer is probably no. And we even get that highlighted more as like she summons Sarah back into the main room dancing, and you get this conversation between her and Madame Blanc of like, you did that, by the way. Like, you disrupted our whole entire dance because you wanted her there. And it's like, yeah, I did, and I would do it again. It's like, all right. Like, she's a character that's a force of nature, but we don't realize it because to give Dakota Johnson, her flowers, her credit, because she's an actress that's had a lot of ridicule over her career, especially for playing things understated. The thing is, that is a choice that's deliberate in this movie. It works really well that she is a very subdued character. She's a very flat, emotionally dry character because as we get along in the movie, we actually start to realize, oh, it's kind of a bit of a facade. And or it's something that she puts on because people underestimate her because of that. But it's not so overtly Machiavellian in the way that that may come across. It's just very subtle.
Yeah.
And the pretzel scene, the contorting dance scene, it has so many specific details down to like the movements, the editing, the type of brutality. As you said, Olga stays physically all together. It's not like she starts ripping apart and like her arm flies off or anything like that. I don't know why, but I was expecting this film, because of its visual style from the drop, to be very mannered, you know, elegant, gentlemanly almost in its approach. But when we got to like the violence, it is as grotesque and honestly absurd. I kind of both was disgusted, frightened, and guffawed at Olga at one point while Twisted just violently pisses herself.
Mm.
And that's a detail that if Eli Roth put it in, you wouldn't be surprised in one of his movies. But to see it in this movie, my jaw was on the floor because it was like, oh, holy crap. Like, yeah, technically, I guess it's a realistic thing that would maybe happen in this, but also it feels so exploitative and gross. But that's what I mean. Like, I was just taken for a loop of like some of the creepy horror stuff shocked me in that way. Where it's like by the end of the movie, we have head exploding schlock, but it's still presented in this very, isn't this artistic and elegant type of way where I kind of was won over. I'm like, man, this is fucking schlocky. Like, their heads are exploding like you're in a video game where you set the button, like set the cheat code where their heads start to inflate and explode. But you're playing this Tom York music over it, and Dakota Johnson is saying in her very articulate voice, like, this is beautiful. I'm just like,
I can't remember if this was...
Okay, you won me over.
I can't remember if this was a line in the film or if it was like trivia or, you know, some review I read, but there was a statement about how in, you know, old witchcraft, dancing was a very big part of it. And yeah, that lends itself to this idea that, you know, the dance is very matter-of-fact and professional. Like, of course they're dancing to do all this stuff.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's something that if you're familiar with witches and, you know, the occult and things of that nature, this all is a perfect guise. And the thing about the original one, this will be one of the last times I mention it, outside of we'll talk about Jessica Harper, but it takes place in a dance academy where there's maybe like one scene of dancing.
Okay.
The dance academy is just an interesting locale, but they don't use it. They really don't. It's basically a big mansion.
Mm-hmm. So the country and the setting are both kind of afterthoughts.
The main thing is it's a school of some sort where you have these matron figures and you have to be in bed by a certain time. And in the original, they're very much about like, the dancing, I guess, comes in the fact that they physically are demanding in terms of like, you have to eat this, you have to have this medication. We have our own doctor on staff that injects you with stuff because you're fatigued from the dancing that's happened off screen. Weirdly enough, it reminds me of Shock Treatment, the film we just covered, where the film is called Shock Treatment and it doesn't feature any shock treatments. And it's like the previous films, it's about a dance academy, doesn't feature much dancing. This is a lot of dancing, and it was smart of them to bring it into the witch aspect of the film. Another thing, just to wrap out on comparison, is the Mother Marcos character in the original. We saw a lot of her, but without actually seeing her. A lot of silhouettes, a lot of hand stuff. But she had like this terrible breathing, like you would always hear her wheezing, and that is referenced in this movie when we have these recurring dreams and flashbacks to the mother of Susie when she's like on her deathbed dying, and you hear her wheezing, and you'll hear that wheezing still continue on as we transition to the scenes after it. So that's like a little reference for the original fans out there, like, hey, we got the creepy breathing thing still in this movie. It's just Mother Marcos isn't the one doing it all the time. So that's a fun thing. How did you feel about Susie as main character, and Dakota Johnson? I mean, I don't think either of us have really watched any of her work, but it's kind of hard to escape knowing who Dakota Johnson is and what she's known for, which is 50 Shades of Grey. But what did you think of Susie Bannion, and what did you think of Dakota Johnson?
Yeah, I thought she did really well. She's a fish out of water character, and the film really establishes that well. You have a lot of scenes of her interacting with the various people at the academy, like the girl next door roommate. You have her with the various head witches or head teachers of the dance academy. And like you said, she has all these interesting little reactions to things, which at first might come across as like, oh, is she oblivious? But then at the end of the film, you might reinterpret that to, oh, it's knowing, isn't it? The opposite of oblivious, fun fact. Yeah, I like you, I'm not too familiar with her. I know that she was in the 50 Shades films, but I'm mostly familiar with those through the Folding Ideas videos, which actually highlight how she's got quite a bit going on in terms of acting in those.
Yeah.
So it is good to see her, being able to channel that in something that you said this earlier, and I fully agree with it. Like, more so than liking or disliking it, there's just a lot of things to respect in this film. It almost, it feels weird to say, but yeah, there's just so many little things like that I just cannot help but, appreciate, even if I walked away kind of feeling like, oh man, that was a bit of a rough sit.
Yeah,
and her performance is definitely one of them. And it's one of those things of like, if I do have to rewatch the film one day, I will have to kind of force myself to a little bit, but at least I'll have things to look out for.
And things to ground you, and her performance is definitely one of those things that will bring you in on a rewatch, especially because you'll be noticing the little tricks of the trade she's putting in there to show us that there's something a little bit more going on with Susie Bannion, and that is obviously a huge change from the original. Susie Bannion's not a secret mother witch. She's just a person that fucks him over. But in this one, they bring that element. And I think it really works in the benefit of the movie in this way. I think we get a lot of the lore, a lot of the little hints and tidbits of it. And it can go in one ear, out the other. But if you follow the basics of like, this is a coven of witches, there's a division between them of how to run the coven. And in the end, the one who's the real dog in charge comes in and says, you guys fucked up. That's the be all and end all if you want to boil it down to the base components of it all.
And on paper, that's a twist that I really love, and I would like to appreciate that a bit more.
I really thought that Dakota Johnson played the new version, the Mother Suspiriorum, fantastically. She had this otherworld feeling. She felt ancient yet young. There's just so much here. And I thought when she had her big scene after the head exploding, where she goes to visit the doctor and tell him what happened to his wife and the story of that, and relieving him of his guilt and vanquishing it from him, and just even saying like, we need guilt, we need shame, but not yours. I think Dakota Johnson, she nailed that, because that's a lot of telling. That scene's just telling us, it's just someone sitting on a bed, just going through the facts, and that's it. And in another performer's hands, that could really fall apart. And heck, even if it was in Susie Bannion's hands from earlier in the movie, it maybe wouldn't have hit as well. But now she's this transcendent being that knows all, and she's maybe on the side of good. Hard to say. I think it was just such a superb scene. I thought it was delivered. It was one of my favorite moments, because I thought that the entire story with the doctor, I thought that could have just been its own movie. I would have watched that as its own movie. I thought it was just such a hard-hitting story. It made me think about my own family situations in which, I had grandfathers who left their families behind to flee, to leave, or once the war was done in their respective countries, they were like, this isn't my place anymore, I have to go. And just like that question of like, well, what happens, when things get lost in that shuffle of transition, and whole places and whole groups of people and families and relationships were just snuffed out during that wartime and like the post-war era, like the fallout of that. You and I can only imagine what that was like for our families. We can't actually, experience, like, we can't really fathom it because we're well beyond it now. But I think this film did such a great job of having like an older character too. Like he was an older guy, like character.
Is the literal standout of the film because, they're not a girl dancer in the film.
Yeah.
They're not a witch. And there's just so many little things in just the performance alone that, complemented what that character was. Like the whole first 8 minutes of the film is, this character having a psychoanalysis session with the Chloe Grace Moretz character who's just left the academy. And a big thing with them is that they're very scientifically minded. They're very psychologically minded. Every time what was her character's name?
Patricia.
Every time Patricia would, say something weird or say something that kind of sounds crazy, his immediate reaction would be to, write it down and start thinking of it as a mental condition, mental problem. It doesn't lend itself to, there is something occult going on here, very scientifically minded. And then as the film goes on, he starts to realize, oh no, maybe it is a little bit bigger than that.
But I like the little details of, he is concerned enough to actually have a bunch of these occult books to study, to understand what she's talking about. So still scientifically minded, still very much thinking these are delusional, but doing like just her reacting to like he has some of these books and like he's written stuff down. Again, he's doing the homework. Like he's not just that's the thing about that. This is very important. He's not just dismissing her like, oh, she's delusional, like the witches try to put on him later.
Mm-hmm.
He cares. He wants to understand his patient, and that's the thing. But one of the other things that's important, that tells you so much about his character, but the thing that told me what his character was when Patricia fucked with that picture of his wife. She runs up, grabs the picture, and that's when you could see he drops the professional version of himself, and he's actually reacting out of fear for what she could do. And she puts the picture down, and then he, like very slowly, but in a very pronounced way, grabs it and puts it back up and strokes it, and then we move on. That tells you who that character really is deep down.
And throughout the rest of the film, you can see that he has a very gentle demeanor in like all sorts of different situations, like the way that he walks through the town, the way he like strokes the heart on that old building, the way he talks to some of the girls. It's like there's always this like gentleness and melancholy that comes from the performance.
There's no cynicism in the character.
No, really there isn't.
I thought it was going to happen with the cops dismissing him and being very snooty and just being very much in the now. Obviously, those policemen, those detectives were fucked with by the witches, but they were also justifying it in a way that makes sense. Like, we have an actual crisis right now, so we can't be dealing with this. But you're expecting, well, maybe that would make the doctor a bit cynical or a bit downtrodden, or maybe roll his eyes at the incompetence of the police. But then you actually have what was, in terms of like the more dramatic scenes, maybe in my top 3 of the movie, the stairwell conversation that he had with that policeman, with the detective about like, we've met before. And the detective didn't know. And just this weird relationship is one of the most important things to this doctor, and the detective doesn't even know it exists.
Yeah, it's just an entire, 2-minute scene of this character telling another character that we haven't seen before or, don't really know much about, like, oh, this is the relationship and history that you and I have, and it means so much to me. And then he just simply turns around, keeps walking down the stairs, and the detective really never says anything.
He's just left there mystified. But it's that thing about how this character has no cynicism outside of internalized guilt. That's the negative part of the character. They're very virtuous, and as he says, like, I'm an innocent person. There's a lot of guilty men in Berlin. I'm not one of them. And that's not a vain thing for him to say. He's right. The only negative quality he truly has is he blames himself for the most likely death of his wife. I thought his whole entire story, I thought it was just so nuanced, so emotional, so well portrayed, not just in terms of the acting, but back to those details, the little details, like the heart on the house that we end the movie on as well, to show us like time has gone on, we're to the modern day, but that still remains. And the details about like the authorities, like, yeah, we can easily say, oh, the authorities, who cares? But he would, because I don't know about you, man, but so many of my relatives who were victims of the Second World War had the utmost respect for those people who the soldiers and the police and whoever got them out of the situation they were in. Like,
I remember, I don't remember the full details, but my mum would always bring up the fact that when my great-grandfather, who was in Auschwitz and then later Mauthausen, 2 concentration camps, that he would always recall the American jeeps that came and, liberated them, essentially.
Same with my grandfather, who was from Ukraine, and he would talk about like, oh, how happy he was to see the Americans, and like where he went first was America. If I'm remembering right, that may have been my Polish. One of my grandfathers went to America first and just traveled from one coast to the other and caught the same boat and then went to Australia. So that was their journey. But yeah, you can see that with this doctor, where it's like he's an established authority figure in himself. Like he's this figure, but here he is taking this moment to be like, hey, they have their own stuff going on, but I'm not going to just offhandedly say, oh, the authorities aren't useful to me, because they are. So I thought his story was just great. How did you feel about that performance, though? And did you realize that it was a woman or Tilda Swinton playing them?
I never realized that it was her until I, read up about the film afterwards. Yeah, I just thought like, oh yeah, it's some old guy.
And with that knowledge, what does that do for you in terms of the character, and like why that choice for you? Like, I've read some of their reasonings as to why, but like when you react to, oh, that's Tilda Swinton, one of the things you have to, like, at least I do, is why? Why not get an actual old guy? Why Tilda Swinton, other than it's kind of fun to have an actor play multiple roles?
Yeah, the fun aspect is the one that the one positive that I have of it. The other, I don't really know if that was a good choice or not. I mean, obviously the performance was really good, but just on paper, I don't really understand. I guess there was the reasoning given that, like, in this film that's so much about women, we should have, this performance played by a woman. But then it's like, well, why make it a man then? Kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great question too. I thought Tilda Swinton did a great job. I thought the makeup was really good. I thought the physicality that she brought to the role was really good. And I almost forgot it was her. You could tell by the voice that it's a feminine voice, but you could also just say they're a very old man.
That's how I took it. It's just an old man.
I thought Tilda Swinton was fantastic in all the roles that she played. I loved Mother Marcos and how fucking freaky she was. And just the weird side mouth thing going on.
This film had hell of a makeup job, yeah.
Oh, the makeup and CG work blend together really well, because there are some where it's like they're blending stuff, and it didn't stand out. It worked really nicely.
In a lot of films, when reviewing or talking about them, I feel like a lot of these nitty-gritty production details would be something that I would look over. Like, I never really imagined myself being like, oh man, the editing in this film, the makeup in this film. But this is one where, I think back on it and it's like, damn, that was really good makeup and editing and things like that.
And just general production, because you said it at the beginning, it really does make you feel like you're in the cold winter, rainy, snowy, miserable type, but it's also presented as very serene and nice. Like, that's just how life is.
Very quiet, yeah.
For us in Australia, we could look at some of these scenes and say, ooh, that's an especially bad winter day. That looks rough and miserable. But then the way the film is actually shooting it and presenting it and saying that moment that you did about the doctor just sitting eating lunch, it's just presented as this is a day in the life of people here in this city, and this is maybe just a nice day, for this time of year, that type of thing. And I totally get that. I mean, I'm sure if you showed people like summer weather Australia during certain times, well, that would look like hell on earth. But for us, it's like, nice day. Nice day. I'm going to go out today. It's a beach day. Lovely.
And for Melbourne, that's a nice hour.
That's a nice hour. Yes. What else do you want to discuss with the film? What were some other things that you wanted to talk about?
What did you think of the length of the film? Because I've read a lot of people, and obviously from my own experience, that it felt very long. I mean, you mentioned that the pacing wasn't too much of an issue for you.
I didn't feel the length because I thought the events followed in a very succinct order and logical order. There was nothing that stood out to me as fluff or perfunctory. There was no story beat or character progression that I thought could be removed for the sake of making it shorter. I can understand that for some people, you see a scene where they're at a table and it's just lots of lingering shots quietly of characters looking at each other. It's like, well, that's something you can cut. But I think that works in terms of the atmosphere that this movie is presenting and living in. Like, if anything, if you cut those scenes out, I think the movie would be less unique or less of a voice of its own. And so for me, the length wasn't a huge factor to it. And I think as well, and I don't know why this is the case, I think this is just because of the history of cinema and our relationship to it. But when I see a movie that's over 2 hours, I do go, oh boy. But then I don't know why, I get rid of that when, one, it's an old movie. Well, Ben-Hur's going to be 5 fucking hours long because it's Ben-Hur, right?
Yeah.
And or if it's a period piece. And this is a period piece. Like, this is a movie that, like, you started up and it is like, no, guys, this is a period piece story. This is set during this time. You're going to learn about the culture of not only the witches, but of Germany and of this conflict going on, and I didn't know any of that stuff.
True, yeah.
I'm not very familiar with it.
That's true. I had no issue with Amadeus being 3 hours long.
That's right.
Yeah.
If it's a biopic or a historical drama or whatever it is, there's certain things that you don't mind being that length. And for myself, this was just an example of that where I knew going in that it was set during when the original film was set, but
Made.
Made. I don't know. I think the original film was just contemporary, Suspiria. I think it was just set in that modern time. It wasn't set in the past. So, like, when it was made and set.
Yeah. So they're both set in 1977, but it means
Germany.
completely different things.
Exactly.
Based on when it was made.
Yeah, isn't that bizarre? So I knew that going in. So I kind of had that in mind. But as soon as you see the first few frames of the movie, I know what I'm getting in for when it comes to, like, that feel of it. So yeah, the length didn't bother me, and I think, as I mentioned, I don't have as strong of an issue with like the film the film didn't lose me. It's just this, I don't know, there is something that held the film back for me from me absolutely loving it completely. I don't know what, I can't quite put my finger on it, but there is something that is just a little bit lacking. I think it is just there's a disparity of emotional investment in the stories. Like I said, I'm truly emotionally invested in some parts of it, and other parts of it, I'm there to see it, I guess, perform the function of moving things along rather than investing me personally in them. If you catch what I mean, like,
I do, yeah.
Yeah, because we've had that where it's like, okay, this is happening because it needs to happen for the story to move forward, but I'm not as emotionally invested in seeing Sarah get fucked over by the witches. It's a great scene, like with the holes in the floor and her leg falls through. Great scene, but at that point, I'm like, yeah, I know what we have to get to that point where it's like she's stumbled across something that she shouldn't have. Now she's got to be taken out. So, good scene, but I wasn't as invested as I was in the Doctor sitting in the crowd watching the dance and then watching him watch the dance. That I was invested in, and nothing was happening in that. You could say what was happening and someone will go, well, nothing really went on there. I'm like, no, man, I felt that scene. While the other one was like, oh, Mia Goth's running around in a hole in the floor and her leg breaks and they zombify her, they hypnotize her, whatever. Yeah, that's stuff happens there. But boy, I was not as glued to the screen to that as I was our old man looking at that because I was so emotionally invested in him. While in some of those other things, the emotional investment just wasn't there. It was more the acknowledgement of this is what you need to do for the sake of the narrative.
Yeah, this is definitely one where it's like, oh, it did feel too long, but if you told me what to cut out, I'm not really sure what to point to because it all does feel like it has some sort of purpose. Yeah, on the topic of that dance, the one where they're wearing the costumes from the poster, when the injury happens at the end and the lights come on, that moment really felt like you were being taken out of a trance because you have this really long, intricate dance happening.
The lights are low.
Lights are low and, everyone's watching quietly and then the lights come on and suddenly there's a shock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the film just has a lot of these really good magical moments like that. I honestly walked into this episode kind of thinking like, man, I really don't know what to say about this film, but we've found quite a bit.
I feel as if this is a specific type of genre within the genre. We've done this movie in ways, but this is still unique and different. But I still think that you're right. Like Black Coat's Daughter, Starry Eyes, Neon Demon. What are some others that we've done? Like these are all films that kind of live. The Love Witch. These are all films that live in this certain world, and by happenstance, all of those happen to be about witches, or a majority of them happen to be about the occult or Satan worshipping or that type of
some
stuff
ritualistic
going on.
thing, yeah.
Ritualistic, occultish stuff, and there's a certain pacing to them. There's a certain atmosphere that they live in, and it's either you're for it or you're not. And some movies strike that accord with you more than others. And I think this one kind of lands in the middle for me. Like I'm not as in love with it as, say, the Love Witch or even the Neon Demon. But I think I like it more than Starry Eyes, weirdly enough. Like, I think I like Okay, so here's something I want to ask you, because I was thinking about this too with something like the Neon Demon and Starry Eyes in comparison to this. This feels very much like the Black Coat's Daughter, where the stylistic stuff and the tonal stuff, although it can get very extreme with like the violence and that, feels very subdued. Like, when we do get this stuff happening, I would never say it's like over the top outrageous gore, like as say the Neon Demon. But the Neon Demon, that's a lot of flashy style and a lot of its aesthetic is right up there. Same with the Love Witch. Like you watch the Love Witch because look at it. This movie, it doesn't have that quite as much. And how did you feel about how it handled itself, like not just aesthetically, but tonally as well? Because sometimes when you're watching a movie that takes itself so brooding and melancholic and seriously, you're either in that headspace or not. How did you feel about that?
I guess the big thing that stood out for me with the way that this film handled the occult stuff is it did feel very, matter of fact. Like in a lot of the ones that you talked about there, other than the Love Witch, because that one's, it wears it on its sleeve. A lot of them, there is like a mystery element of like, what is going on here? Like, what is the ritual happening in Starry Eyes? What are all these weird behaviors about in the Neon Demon? Black Coat's Daughter was one of the films that we covered where it was like, oh, is it psychological or is it a monster? Which we've done many of. This one, it's like, no, these are witches. It's very casually presented to you. And a lot of the witchcraft that you see in the film is done in a very, as much as the effects are, big and glamorous, like, the whole Olga contortion scene, it does feel like there's a very traditional ritual going on behind it. And I guess the fact that they're not really playing into the mystery aspect of it makes it stand out a bit more to me.
Which is, again, the opposite of the original film, where the original film, it's a mystery
it's
that
the
we're
ending
unfolding.
Twist, right?
Yeah. What else is there? Do you think at the end of this movie, the witches we have remaining, or the forces that they have, because there's clearly two parties here, are they good? Are they evil? Are they something other than that? Like, do you view them outside of like those morality things? Because Mother Marcos is clearly like this demonic, evil little goblin creature, but 95% of the evil doings we see in the movie are from are lovable Tilda Swinton, Madame Blanc. Like they're related to the Olga scene is because of her. So, and in the end, we're supposed to see like that side as like the good side that won out, and like they understood the assignment of what needed to be. So how do you feel about like the witches overall and like what you're supposed to take away from them?
I think this is where I have to disappoint you because I think I was a little bit too checked out to really, internalize a lot of that. But just looking at like the performance of Dakota Johnson, at least at the end, where, there is the possibility that like, oh, she actually seems, level-headed and possibly good. It does, give me that sense of like, oh, there was like a force of good happening behind this reveal.
I think that comes in from her relationship and conversation with the good person of the movie, because she lets him live and lets him be relinquished of the pain. And that does a lot of great work. But I know you said you checked out, but what about Madame Blanc as a character? Because Tilda Swinton plays her with like this softness and like this intensity at the same time. We know from a lot of the intercuttings and like little touches that she is directly responsible for some of the most ghoulish stuff of the movie, and yet I felt for her. Like I was like, oh, she for some reason, just because of like how I think it's because how Tilda Swinton played it. I was constantly like, oh man, she knows how to do this right, but like what they want to do seems bad.
Yeah, she didn't really play it as a caricature. She kind of played it like very sincerely.
So when she played the caricature version of Madame Marcos, it stands as a contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, because they're the villainous force. They're the thing that drives the film, and yet in the end, they achieve what they wanted to, or achieve a version of what they wanted to. And you're supposed to feel this sadness when they say that Madame Blanc is dead, or like she's gone. And there's that nice touch where one of them like tries to put her head back on, and she moves and reacts, and it's like, and we don't know what happens from there on out. It's like, okay, whatever's going on there. But I just wanted to bring it up because it's something that is a major force of the movie, where I think it shows you these ghoulish, horrible, grotesque things that they are capable of doing, that they do on their own. And yet, when we actually sit down with Tilda Swinton's performance, I can't help but humanize them. But all the other witches, they all play it sinister and creepy. I don't know if you'll agree with that, but like none of the other witches that aren't played by Tilda Swinton come across as like normal or nice. They all come across as sinister.
Yeah, I can see that.
Even the one that kills herself, the one that stabs herself in the neck, she was creepy and weird. I didn't know what to make of her.
Yeah, she was very standoffish.
She was the one that sensed that things were going wrong all of the time, and then she just was like, I'm done. I've got to get out of here. But yeah, that's Suspiria. Are you interested in watching the original?
I suppose I am.
Are you original in seeing Jessica Harper be the lead?
But that raises it a bit more.
What did you when you realized that it was her? You said you didn't realize in the moment of the movie, but what did you think of her moments in this film? Because I found them very, very touching. Even though I knew it was an obvious, like I knew it was a trick.
There has to be something.
There has to be something here, but
this is way too casual of a happy ending.
Yeah, and we've got more movie.
Yeah.
But how was that for you?
Yeah, it was a great moment, not just, for Jessica Harper, but also for our psychoanalyst character. There's a moment of disbelief when they first see each other, and, you can really buy that, this is how someone might react to, suddenly being thrown this amazing, glamorous bone.
We've had our experiences, both being, of Polish and, families and whatnot, but it did hit very hard for me, that whole entire subplot. And when they did reunite and they were telling each other their stories of their lives that they've lived that are completely different because of this event that happened, the event being the Second World War. And they talk about it. I don't know if it was like this, if it's like this in your family, but the way that they talked about it felt very authentic to me, where it's like they don't even need to outright say the Nazis or the German, they just say it in this very matter of fact, we both know what happened here way. And that's a lot of how it was with my grandfathers when you tried to ask them any questions about one of the most important moments of history of the 20th century that they lived through. There was just a very matter of fact and de-emphasized way that they talked about it. I don't know if it was like that with your family or not.
I guess, yeah, it was. It's common knowledge what happened back then. I guess, yeah. They didn't really talk. I guess they didn't really talk around it, but yeah, it wasn't something that you had to focus on. We didn't have, movie exposition every time the Nazis were brought up.
Well, no, but because it's family and curiosity, and you want to know, yeah, we know what happened, but on an individual and personal level, sometimes you want to know, what was that like for you? By the way, our family lived through some of the most horrific events that humanity has ever put upon itself. And you ask them about it, and it's just yeah, that happened.
Yeah. I guess I heard most of it through secondary accounts, usually my mum saying oh yeah,
exactly.
Babcha said this, Prajadik said this kind of thing.
And even your accounts of hearing from your mum about what it was like living in Poland,
communist-occupied
Poland, and how that's its own thing, and just all these little details of what that life was like.
Do well in school, but don't you dare learn Russian.
But I just thought the Jessica Harper scene did that very well, and just them embracing as they're walking through the tunnels and walking through the streets. I thought one of the scariest moments, because was there anything that in the terms of the horror or the creepy atmosphere that did get to you? Because honestly, it wasn't a jump scare so much, but I did freak the fuck out when Jessica Harper disappeared, and he turned around for a brief second, then turned back, and a witch was right up in his face screaming at him and jumped at him and took him in. I was like, holy, that got me, not just because of a sudden loud noise, but because that shiver down your spine of oh, she's gone. Oh, where did she go? We know it's a trick, but oh, she's gone, and the editing of it, the timing of it, and then, oh my God, now this crazy thing's happening. I thought that was really well done. It was a standout moment for me.
When it turned around and she wasn't there, I was like, oh, he's back to reality.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, the screaming witch was like, oh, and now things are going from peaceful to very bad.
Yeah.
There wasn't really anything that shocked or horrified me, but definitely, things that made me raise my eyebrow, like the Olga scenes, oh, this is interesting. And I mentioned the blood explosion on Tilda Swinton in the climax. Yeah.
I liked when Sarah found Chloe Grace Moretz, and she was just this very passive zombie creature that couldn't be bothered to get up, and then she just went back, and the other one missing their hands and feet, crawling around contorting, and then the things that we don't see fully, there was all of these other voices calling out to Sarah in the murky background of wherever the fuck they were downstairs. I thought that was really well done. But that is our conversation on Suspiria 2018, Luca Guadagnino's redo of this story. He has a style. I am interested to check out his other films now that I've seen this, because obviously I feel like this is going to be an outlier of what he does. I mean, one of the most successful things he's done is Call Me By Your Name, which I can't imagine being similar to this in not just genre and tone, but film-wise.
I've heard great things about it, yeah.
With disgraced actor Armie Hammer. Don't forget he's in that movie. So that'll be a fun thing. But I can't wait to check out some more of his films. Would you recommend Suspiria 2018?
Despite the fact that I'm not too keen on the overall product, I think I would. There's just a lot of really great little filmmaking things going on in this one. And in terms of the reception, I know this film didn't make quite a lot of its money back, to put it in the least, but the response seems to be like pretty even overall. Like there's a lot of people who really loved it, a lot of people who really didn't like it, a lot of people that just plainly say, "Oh yeah, I think this is better than the remake." This film has a lot going on in it, and yeah, that's worth checking out.
I agree. I think it's a great movie. I think I prefer the original one more, but it has a lot of problems too. Neither film, in my eyes, is a perfect, sparkling gem, but I enjoy both of them. I recommend both of them, but I do recommend this one. I think it takes a swing and it actually connects. I applaud and appreciate this type of approach to the story. I think that the acting was really well done, like delivered. I thought the music was great, very, very well placed. The music, it was there when it needed to be there, and used in ways that was very peculiar, but in a good way. Like the opening bits where we get like the background of Susie, and it's like the mother's body being washed and things being packed away, and you get this song, like an actual song with lyrics, and it feels as if it's out of place, but also it matches wonderfully. And did you stay to the end of the credits?
So I watched it on Amazon, and it has like a, rewind or fast forward 10 seconds. I was like 10 seconds forwarding my way through it, and there was a shot.
Yeah, with Dakota Johnson wiping her hand off on something or doing some hand gesture. I don't know what that's all about. I'm sure someone could tell us, but I wanted to reference that. Yes, we both did see the post-credit little sting.
Post-credit shot.
It was fine. I don't care. I think the end shot is the end shot. The rest of it, whatever, post-credit, whatever.
Yeah, I don't really get it.
But it is now time for the listening people's recommendation, and we have moved out of Spooky Month. It is the end from this point on. That's it.
Yeah.
It's all wrapped up in a neat little bow, and we are moving away from spooky movies, and we're moving towards some animated fare back to Japan, and forgive me if I mispronounce the title of this. And this film, I don't know where it fits in to this, but our good friend, I do believe it was our good friend the Doctor.
Oh, this is that cop thing?
Yes.
Pat
Labor, the movie.
Pat Labor, yeah.
Pat Labor, the movie, which I think is a movie in relation to a show, but they came out at the same time. I don't know what the deal is.
He had a full explanation of it when he recommended it in the comments.
Well, we'll read over that, but everyone, make sure to check that out. There is a version of it with subtitles out there, easily available for people to find. Just look up the movie and you shall find it. We shall be watching that and talking about that. Neither of us have seen this, right?
No, I don't really know much about it.
I'm not familiar with
I hadn't heard of it until
the source material stuff, the manga, the anime, the follow-up movies. I'm not familiar, but I looked up. I'm like, oh, there's stuff here. I don't know any of it. But...
And it's a Dr. Rashes,
Yes.
Or Drew Rashes.
No, Doctor.
Rashes.
They have a doctorate in anime now because they recommend anime
I think his comment said he has a doctrine.
Oh, a doctrine.
I think he meant doctorate, but
no, doctorate
in
anime.
Doctrine Rashes.
So everyone make sure to check that out. I'll have the name of the film properly spelled out and everything, in the year, in the description, where you can also find our social medias and email if you want to follow us and or contact us. Bartek, it was a pleasure doing Spooky Month with you. Do you have anything to say about the month itself? Did you enjoy your time with the movies that we did? Did you feel like you yourself in general got to partake in the things that you would partake in during this time of year? Did you play anything spooky? Did you watch anything else? Did you listen to anything? Were you reading anything? Or were the stuff on the podcast the things that satisfied your hunger for that?
Yeah, I think you mentioned last episode that like we had a very atmospheric, spooky month this year, and I did enjoy that. I think this film ironically kind of brought it back to like classic spooky month fare. But I also mentioned either last episode or the episode before that we'd done a lot of spooky stuff outside of Spooky Month.
Yeah.
Like I even read a zombie manga at some point, so yeah, it kind of felt like spread throughout the year, just a little bit of spookiness here and there.
Suspiria actually reminded me of The Menu. That was what I connected it with out of the movies we've done
But
this
Ryan,
month.
that's one of the ones without Jessica Harper.
It didn't have, well, that we know of. She could have been in that movie. We just didn't see it. I just thought about it because both take a very specific type of culture and twists it into a cultish, weird horror situation in which our characters find themselves in. Like, isn't that interesting? Where the menu's like, what happens if it's high-end chefs? And then the Suspiria universe is like, what happens if it's high-end dancers?
Prestigious dancing.
Prestigious dancers. And I think that's just a fun idea. Like, what's next? What occupation would you pitch next to be the weird cult that forms?
The people that cut bonsai trees.
Wow, that's your pick, Bartek. That's his pick. That's his pick. What's my pick? I would love
Lumberjacks.
well, damn, I was going to suggest something, but then I realized the film exists. I was going to suggest cabbies, taxi drivers, but then I realized the film Taxi Driver kind of has like that weird subculture of taxi drivers, like especially when he actually comes back to the rank and he's talking to Peter Boyle and like you have the weird kind of homage. But imagine it,
Excited.
But imagine that as a weird Wicker Man type spooky, oh no, we found ourselves in the subculture of cabbie. You get the cabbie from Escape from New York. Have him be there. Remember him?
Yes, I do.
You have Peter Boyle. Yeah, I would love cult cabbies. That's what you call it, the cult of cabbies.
Well, we said before recording that, we'd sing Closing Time at the end of Spooky Month.
Do you want to sing It's Closing Time?
One last call for alcohol, so finish
your
your
whiskeys
whiskey
and beer. You don't sound confident in the lyrics. Come on, you've listened to the Weird Al version. You should know those ones.
Well, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay
here.
I know who I want to take me home. What band sings it again?
Semisonic.
Semisonic.
They give me a semisonic.
In conclusion, Spooky Month this year turned Jessica Harper into a mini version of our Jennifer Garner.
I was going to say, is Jessica Harper the Paul Giamatti of 2024? They just suddenly keep appearing. It's not like we went out of our way to choose, Jessica Harper. We, by happenstance, just kept getting Jessica Harper.
We acknowledged it before we picked our films, but yeah, it did just keep happening, didn't it?
Yeah, isn't it? But you already had like shock treatment in your mind a bit, and I already had this one in my mind for this month, and then it's like, oh god, oh no, Phantom of Paradise, oh god.
Looking forward to Jessica Harper's performance in Pat Labor, the movie. Not even the English dub, just the Japanese.
She's in it as herself.
And she either sings or dances.
I don't know if this movie is like a mecha movie or whatever, but I love it if there's a mech of a giant Gundam of Jessica Harper, and the people are like, oh no, it's Jessica Harper Gundam, and she just sings like
Ryan,
that's her
for fuck's
attack.
sake, it's a Jessica Harper mobile suit.
What's the name of them in Evangelion? They have names, right? They
Eva units?
Yeah. And what's the thing that they power them up with? Like the juice? The LEL juice or whatever
LCL?
it is. LCL. Jessica Harper's powered up by LCL. Oh no!
Well, that's actually apt because, they are Evangelion spoilers. I won't say it. No, you can watch it, I guess.